Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video we're going to look at the Disney film Remember the Titans. So I'm going to do this a little differently, partially because this is based on a real story and Disney. So we're going to talk about the film first, and then we're going to talk about the actual life events of the 1971 Titans from T.C. Williams High School in Virginia. So in the film, the story tells of a school that is being integrated, so blacks and whites are being integrated for the first time. The coach of T.C. Williams, which was an all-white high school, is being pushed to the assistant coach position, and they're being brought in. His name is Yost. They're brought in Herman Boone, who is an African-American football coach. This is played by Denzel Washington, and he's charged with essentially integrating this football team. And he's married with a child. Yost is single. His wife ran off, and he has a young daughter. So he's a single father. So throughout the course of the film, you kind of see this played out. The other thing that's going on is Yost is competing for a Hall of Fame spot in a high school football Hall of Fame. So you go through Boone integrating these blacks and whites. You see the young men, though the timing seems to be slightly confused. It's been a while since I've seen this, but they're saying, I believe, that this is happening in the 70s, but they're portraying something that, again, integration going on, which happened more in the mid-60s. And that's the style that they're using with the clothing and the hairstyles. So I'm going to assume that's how they're playing it, that it's going to be the mid to late, the mid 60s. So, and again, they're talking about the school is T.C. Williams is integrating. So Boone brings them together. You have they have a camp at Gettysburg where he integrates the buses. He makes all the football players wear suits to get on the plane. Or on the buses. They have issues where he's forcing them, he's very, very hard on them, forcing them to integrate. There's a member of the team, I believe he's one of the captains, is very, very racist, he fights a lot, he's pissing off Boone left and right, and eventually he is talked down to by Gary Bertier, who's one of the white players, who then bonds with one of the other leader black players, which is Julius Campbell. So those two become leaders of the team and bring them together. You have a few other characters that are brought together, including a white kid who's doing badly in school, and Yost helps him. And then you have Yost's daughter, Cheryl, who's hanging out. She's very football crazy. She's always there because, again, he's a single father. So she's with him constantly. You see throughout the season that she does spend time with Boone's family, so Yost can do different things. And at one point in time, she's there playing with Yost's daughter, and a brick is thrown through the window because there's racial tensions. Because, again, you have the integration of the school and the football team. And the team is very much an underdog. They're playing other all-white teams that haven't been integrated, and they have to fight hard. They're very much depicted as the underdog in fighting various games, including night games, and they have a 13-0 season. And right before that final game, Gary Bertier is leaving a celebration, and he gets in a car accident where he becomes paralyzed, and specifically Campbell claims to be his brother and come in and see him. Those two are definitely shown as becoming very, very close. Why the rest of the team becomes close as well. You see a lot of the tensions going on in the school, both between the blacks and the whites, and there's a lot of tension, as you would see during integration. And you see Gary, who's injured right before the final game. They do, in fact, win the final game against an all-white team. They have issues possibly with the referees, who have essentially threatened Yost if he doesn't go along with what they're doing, as making bad calls, that he won't get his Hall of Fame spot. And you see him struggling with that. You see the team struggling. You see them doing a whole bunch of hard work. And again, they're fighting very hard because they're fighting all white teams. And they're the underdogs. And then they do win a 13-0 season without Bertier because he's been injured and is paralyzed. They kind of ended at Bertier's funeral. It is said that he becomes an Olympian in the Paralympic Games, that he's coached by Yost, and then it shows his funeral in the fall with Cheryl kind of narrating and how the team very much was always close, and how Yost and Boone were close for the rest of their lives. So that is the film. So again, it very much focuses on the integration, how there was a lot of tensions between the football players and the blacks and the whites, and the entire town is exploding because they're integrating this formerly all-white high school and this all-white football team, and the fact that the Titans were the underdogs. So that is very much how the movie is played. And I love this film. And as a film, it is fantastic. It's your typical underdog football team where they're kind of, whether they're down and out or not, but they're struggling, and you have to deal with this integration thing, and the team is fighting amongst themselves, and the coaches are having to get to know each other, and there's all sorts of things going on, as is pretty common in this type of film. And I loved it. And then I found out the truth. Okay, so now we're going to transfer into what is God's name is wrong with this. First thing, as I said, they play this almost like it's in the mid-60s with integration. Nope. This is the 1971 Titans. T.C. Williams was integrated in 1965. So that was not the problem. What was going on was they were not so much integrating as they were consolidating. There had been T.C. Williams, which is a senior school, which is juniors and seniors only, and then it had two other schools, which were freshmen and sophomores only. And they combined the three. That's what was going on. So it wasn't so much that they were integrating, because all the schools were integrated at that point. Again, it was 1971. So there basically it was just a combined thing. The reason the team was good was because they had a wider pool to pick from. They went from having 2 classes to 4. And again, they were combining 3 schools. So that's what happened. So again, this is 71, the schools were already integrated. That wasn't the issue. There was racial tensions in Virginia, in Alexandria at that time. It had nothing to do with high schools, though. It had to do with an event, from my research, from what I remember, between a white shopkeeper and a black high school student. And that's what was going on. So there were racial tensions. It wasn't about the football team. And there is conflicting accounts of whether or not there was issues at the camp. Certain members of the team are saying no. That particularly like the incident, the fictionals, during the camp they portrayed a fictional character who was very racist and very much against things and was demonstrating what would happen had this actually been an integration story. And the people who were there, particularly I believe from what I was records from Ronnie Bass, who was one of the he was portrayed in the film, but he was one of the Titans, and said no. Kid like this would have been kicked out of camp. It wasn't going to go. Yes, Boone did integrate the buses, but again, it was 1971 and the schools had been integrated for years at this point, so it wasn't a strange thing. There is a Hall of Fame for high school football coaches. It did not exist in 1971, so the whole storyline with Yost being threatened with not being in the Hall of Fame makes no sense, because again, that institution didn't exist at the time. The other thing is, again, they portray the styling, like the clothing, the hairstyles, as if it was the 60s or even particularly for straight-laced kids, or even earlier than that, because they make fun of Ronnie Bass's hair being very long. Again, this is 1971. In the article that I read, Bass is like, my hair was never quite that long. They also show him kissing Gary Bertier and pretending to be gay. No, never happened. He's like, no, I did not do that. And my hair was never that long. But a lot of the guys, if you look at the photographs, their hair was at least longer and shoulder length. It wasn't crew cut. The African American guys had afros because it was 1971. And that was just the way it was. I think even Boone had a bit of an afro. The other big thing, and this refers to Yost, and the actual person was irritated about this, he was divorced with 4 daughters. Yes, Cheryl was at the football games. No, he was not a single father. She primarily lived with her mother. She had a younger sister. She had an older sister in high school and an older sister in college. And I believe she was in elementary school at the time. She was not football crazy. She was there. She was probably spending time with her dad. But again, she was not football crazy. Therefore, she never spent time with Boone's kids because it wouldn't have made sense. She was home with her mother and her sister, and her 2 sisters who were still at home at the time because one of them was away at college. The sisters did not care. Cheryl herself passed of, I believe, either a heart defect or a brain aneurysm in her 30s. So she grew up, got married, had a kid, and then she died. So by the time this film came out, she had passed. Her sisters did not care about this. Yost himself did, and he complained, and they didn't care. So that whole thing was completely made up. So the issue with the referees, they can't tell. I think from what I've been able to read of interviews, it's like maybe, maybe not. The other big thing, the Titans were not, under any circumstance or any stretch of the imagination, underdogs. Far from it. They won most of their games without the other team scoring. In fact, I'm going to pull that up because I have a website here that shows me the actual team here. Let me scroll down there. Here it is. So this is the scores and their schedule of the 1971 Titans. So the first game of the season was TC 19, Harridan nothing. Next game, TC Williams was 25, Yorktown was nothing. Next game, TC was 26, Hayfield was 7. Next game, TC Williams was at 25 against Jefferson. Jefferson scored nothing. This is the team that they have a tendency to portray as the final game. This was TC Williams versus Marshall. And this is literally the closest game they had all season. TC Williams scored 21, Marshall scored a 16. And then the rest of the next couple, you have, they played against Groveton, which was 0, Madison, which was 0, W&L, which was 0, Wakefield, which was 0. And then they played a 26-8 game against Ireton. And then the playoffs, these were the playoff games, they had a 28-0 against Annandale, a 36-14 against Woodrow Wilson, and then a 27-0 against Andrew Lewis. So, yeah. Underdogs, they most certainly were not. So, yeah, their 13-0 season was not an underdog story at all. And that's very much how they play it in the film. A couple other things. Gary Bertier played in that final game. He was hurt in a car accident. He had borrowed his mother's car after that final game. He was at some sort of banquet, and the car malfunctioned. And that's how he became a paraplegic. And quite a few of the members of the team claimed to be relatives in order to see him in ICU. It was not just Julius Campbell. The entire team was close, and I believe that's directly from Julius Campbell's what he said. They had all became close. I mean, I'm not very familiar with football, but they spent a lot of time together. I mean, if they start at a training camp, probably in the summer, I have no idea what high school football teams in, but then they're playing games and they're practicing probably every day. So they spent a lot of time together. So they became close. From some of my research, I think this is an anecdote that Boone was a bit of a dick. An equal opportunity dick, but apparently he was a bit of a dick. So there was that as well. And he's kind of portrayed that way, but not much. And let's see, a few other things. Yes, Gary Bertier, that was true. He did become, Yosh did coach him for the Paralympic Games. He did die, when did Gary Bertier die? He died in the spring. Let's see. Yes, Gary Bertier was in fact a good football player. Seeing a picture of him now, yeah, he did kind of have longer hair. Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, he did die. He died 10 years later. So he died in spring of 81. So that's the other thing they kind of got wrong. They showed in the film, it showed his funeral in the fall. He died in March. So it was not falling leaves. It was probably just very, very wet, and the leaves may not have green on them yet. So that's the other thing. He died in spring. And again, it wasn't at the it was after the final game. He was very, very good. Let's see if I'm missing anything else. Let's see. Anything else here? They show, and I mentioned in the review, Herman Boone did not have a brick thrown through his window. It was a toilet. So again, there was in fact racial tensions going on. It just had nothing to do with integration of the schools. So, but yeah, they didn't. That I can understand. That's one of the few things. Like a brick is dramatic enough. You don't want to throw a toilet. Also, I think the filmmakers thought it would be funny if they threw a toilet through the window, and a brick was more terrifying. I mean, technically, a toilet was very, very terrifying at the time, but possibly on film it wouldn't make that much sense. So that was another minor difference. Let's see. There was anything else? I mentioned Yost. There's conflict about the racism. Yost's daughter, let's see. Mentioned the referees already. Oh, the other thing they mentioned that I forgot to pull on. Again, they make a big emphasis on the fact that T.C. Williams is playing all white teams. Again, we're going to have to repeat this a lot. This is 1971. All the teams were integrated at this point. It was not about integration, and God, the film plays this up. And when I found out the real story, it's like, oh dear God, no. I mean, that all the teams were integrated at this time. Was there racism with the referees? Maybe. Nobody can tell. And this film came out in 2000. These events happened in 1971. Nobody cares anymore. All of these guys are grown up, and Bertier died 10 years later in 81. It's been decades. So nobody knows. And again, as I mentioned, there was no Hall of Fame thing going on because it didn't exist. So, let's see. Anything else? No. Again, there was no protesters outside the high school because it wasn't about integration. And I mentioned Ronnie Bass. So, yeah. No, he was not a long-haired hippie. And that interview was like, no, I was never a long-haired hippie. None of that stuff outside happened. He did not practice Tai Chi outside the school. No. No, that just didn't happen. No, he did not kiss Bertier. The actress and character playing Bertier's girlfriend did not exist. She was made up completely for the film, but to represent the youth at the time. And whether this was true or not or accurately depicted is debatable. I mentioned Bertier and Campbell, who did become friends, but again, so did most of the team. So the other thing is, in the film, they do this, and they always have to do this on these sports movies. The big inspirational speech at Gettysburg. No, didn't happen. Did he give an inspirational speech? Maybe. but he didn't do it at Gettysburg, because they did have a tour of Gettysburg battlefield, but he didn't do some massive speech. They weren't running and practicing at a national monument at the crack of dawn in the morning in the fog, and then him giving this giant speech. No. Well, I think you might have to pay. Again, it is a national monument. They're not going to allow football players to go running around a historic battlefield. So, and I think in that speech is where he mentions, like, we're fighting against all white teams. No, you're not. They're all integrated. So, I think that's mostly it. But that's one of the reasons this thing bugs the living daylights out of me. Yeah, this is looking at a website. Yeah, the battlefield thing did not happen. Let's see. Yeah, this is interviews from Ronnie Bass, and he's essentially saying that no, that the racial tensions didn't happen at the football camp. And of course, the creators of the film said, it's like, well, you don't want to be portrayed as racist now. It's debatable. I'm going to trust the players because, you know, they were there, and they could say, we grew up, we changed. Probably pretty easy to say. Yes, they did go to camp at Gettysburg. That was true. And again, yes, they integrated the bus them. Apparently, they have a quote from Boone's. Yes, I forced them on each other. I forced them to learn each other's culture and to be part of each other's lives. Well, I mean, there was racial tensions. I mean, blacks and whites weren't mixing in 71. So yes, him integrating the buses was probably a big thing. But again, the players are saying that there wasn't as many racial tensions at camp because they were competing for spots on the football team. So they knew they had to play together. They knew that from the get-go. They just didn't realize they were going to be forced to kind of socialize with one another. So it's a little different. So that's mostly it. I mean, as a film in and of itself, if it were just fiction, it would be perfectly fine. It's the standard inspirational sports movie that throws in integration as their conflict. Not complicated. Entertaining to watch. Inspirational to watch because, of course, you have Denzel Washington, who's very, very good. And he kind of leads the film. Anything with Denzel Washington in it's going to be decent because he's a fantastic actor. It falls flat in the fact that it misrepresents history. It plays on the whole schools being integrated, which was false. It gives the impression that it's happening in the 60s, in the mid-60s, when it happened in 71. It's giving the implication that the Titans were the underdogs when they were not. They were a very, very good team who did very, very well and wiped out most of their competition. Nobody really ever got close. So it portrayed Cheryl Yost as an only child of a single father, which again, she was literally the middle child, the second youngest of a divorced couple, spending most of the time with her mother, her 3-year-old little sister, and her high school sister, and then she had an older sister in college. So, and yeah, those are my issues with them. My main issue is the fact that they misportray the history and play something for integration when it wasn't. The other funny thing that I saw, I think this was on IMDb, Virginia outlawed night games, like back in the late 60s. So by 1971, they have a tendency to portray a lot of these for cinematic effect, them playing at night. They wouldn't have been. There would I think from what I was able to read, most of their games were around 12 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturdays. So you wouldn't. Is it possible they could be playing night games in other states when they did away games? Possibly. But as far as I know, that last game was not a night game. So that's the other thing. So that's really it for this review. Do I recommend this film? Depends on what you're using it for. And depends on how you talk to your kids about it. Personally, I might, in probably more of a showing it to maybe middle school, my child in middle school or high school, and talking to them about how films can misrepresent history. So to be careful when you watch inspirational films like this that are supposedly based off actual events, do your research. Because companies like Disney, particularly Disney, we will get to more Disney. I don't like Disney, but they have a tendency to warp history for the cinematic effect. They also do this when they misrepresent films, and Disney is notorious for this. I will get there. Trust me, I have various books of which I want to rant and rage about the screwing up of Disney. This is just the first one, and this one pissed me off. I remember when I found this out, and this pissed me off a lot. So, just how badly they screwed up these actual events and this actual history for telling a story about integration and underdogs when it was not a story about integration or underdogs. Their main points of their film were completely false. It wasn't little stuff. It was these major points that they pretty much they misrepresented to this team in their entirety. So, and of course their look of them. Like, nope, afros, longer hair. It was the 70s. The crew cuts of the 50s and were long gone. So that's really it for this review. So if you want to use this film in your homeschooling, definitely use it as the point of teaching children to check their sources, to not necessarily take a film as truth. And it can be used as a compare and contrast. Can you, if you want to work on those essays, it would be great for that. It's like, yes, this is the film. What did they get wrong? So those are kind of the learning points that you could utilize this film. Do not show it as something that's depicting true events, because it's not. It's not at all. It's misrepresenting things like crazy. And it upset Yost because his daughter was misrepresented. Ronnie Bass, from some of the quotes I see, it's Disney and it's irritating. But this isn't what happened. It's like, to the people who know, I think Julius Campbell, who does some inspirational talking to schools, again, he has to explain that no, this stuff did not happen and what really went on. So that's it for this review. If you like what you see, check out the rest of my channel. I do a lot of children's book reviews, some more film reviews. This month being February, I'm covering a lot of African American children's books, some adult, at least one adult novel. I'm covering The Color Purple. I'm also covering Asian history as well, because this is the month of the Lunar New Year. So I'm doing some of that stuff this month as well. So you could get at least 3 to 4 videos a week this month. So check out the rest of my channel. I have done a bunch of stuff from Native American history to fiction to nonfiction. I have a lot of children's stuff, a lot of homeschool resources that I'm working on or I've already done. So check out the rest of my channel and like and subscribe to see more, because I have a bunch more planned. Thank you.